Are you holding back? So that powerful decision that you're not making is costing you more than you think.
Today, we're dissecting the silent sabotage of non-decision and how ambition can actually be the thing that's holding you back. Welcome to Decisions That Count. I'm neuroscientist, Dr. Shawn Watson.
And I'm Michelle O'Brien, and our guest, Penny Locaso, is a behavioural specialist leadership coach who pivoted from a 16-year executive career to decode why ambitious women often struggle with their own expertise and making impactful choices.
Today, we're going to explore some of the deep-seated fears that we all have, from imposter syndrome to how some of the brightest people in the world still feel icky when they call themselves an expert. So Penny's going to take us through some human-centered strategies and groundbreaking research that's going to uncover ways that we can help to mitigate this effect and make the best decisions for ourselves.
Penny, welcome to Decisions That Count. Thank you so much for coming to see us today.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm excited for the chat.
Awesome. So I just want to kind of get straight into it because often when we feel like we're not making a decision, it's safe. But actually, what does it mean when we say, well, not making a decision is actually making a decision?
Yeah. Not making a decision is often driven by fear. That's probably the first thing I would say. Okay. So fear in my work is perhaps the number one barrier to not making that decision. And the best example I can think of is that I can't tell you how many prospective clients I've met with, and they will stay in the misery of the known rather than step into the happiness of the unknown. So making the decision to make a significant change that they know could make their lives happier, but because that decision is attached to uncertainty, they will stay in the misery of the known. And like that is not making a choice that is a choice, if that makes sense.
I have so many people, so many friends who, very much stay in unhappy situations, whether that's a relationship or whether that's living in a particular, an apartment that might be falling apart, or in staying in a job that just know that they're no longer getting growth from. Because of that fear of the unknown. And I think, it'd be amazing to realize that not making a decision in those situations, it might feel safer and easier, but you're still making a decision. And that decision is to stay in those situations.
Well, and I mean, Shawn can probably speak to this with his background, but I always find it fascinating because I say awareness is the first step to change, and our physiology is designed to keep us safe. So our central nervous system, when anything feels uncertain, like every situation we step into, we assess for risk and reward. And when we feel that uncertainty, it activates our central nervous system into that fight, flight, freeze, or for a lot of women, fawn, which is that people-pleasing overdrive. And those responses is our system's way of saying resist, step back, or run away because we need to keep you safe. And it's an automatic response. So we are the hardest things or the hardest decisions we have to make actually mean we have to work against the automatic system within our body, which is thinking that it's keeping us safe. And it's resisting, it's actually pushing us away. And yet I always say fear is the pathway to the happiness that you seek, to the fulfillment that you seek. And yet we actually more often than not choose, like I say, not to choose and allow the fear to overtake it and say, well, we'll keep us safe. And that means staying in misery sometimes. Shawn, interested in your perspectives though on this, given your neuroscience background.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're dead right for kind of what our body and response is. I guess the only thing to add is more of a personal experience for me. It's just, once I had a family and kids too, so it's less even like my own risk. And now I was trying to judge like the fear for like moving my children or for my wife or stuff like that. So even like my close social inner family actually had a major impact on my risk tolerance, my fears as well. Whereas before I feel like I was maybe, I don't know if I was braver, but I just had less to worry about before I had kids or a family. Mm-hmm.
And the kids thing's fascinating as well, right? Because if there's one thing that we know, and science tells us again, kids are so damn adaptive. And yet as parents, we actually won't give them, again, the decision is to not give them the space to adapt. But the younger they are, more often than not, the more adaptive and resilient they are, because they just roll with it and they're curious, right? Because we haven't bashed curiosity out of them when they're young. We haven't put them through the constructs yet that are going to take that magic away. And so putting them in new environments just makes them even more curious, more often than not, with the right support structures.
And you're right. You hit a big word there. Like, the one thing I always want to give my kids is resilience. And so probably giving them new situations and experiences is going to help to build that.
I love the saying from Jordan Peterson, and he said, do you want to keep your children safe, or do you want them to be strong? Because you can't have both.
I think there's also that element of, we're really content right now. We live in Singapore. We've got this bubble. We've got great jobs. We're like, it's like, do we rock the boat? But I don't know if we're at that point where it's like we're not growing anymore, and therefore maybe it's time to move on. It's time to find a different country. It's time to, look at what's next for our chapter. But life is so good, it's so good here. So many people would say, well, why would you ruin that or risk that?
Yeah, I can relate. That's like the hardest, is when life is like 5 to 7 out of 10. Like, it's good, right?
Oh, mine's like an 8 or 9.
Could be better.
That's great.
Well, then why are you going anywhere?
But I don't know. It's just like, I don't know if we're ready for something else,
I just want to pull out the words that you just said, Michelle, without leaving behind, like, I think it's like you say, like, why change things when they're already good? But you just said 2 words that keep coming out in my research with high-performing women around defining leadership on their terms. And that is this conditioning within women around not rocking the boat. And those are the specific words that I have heard multiple times. And I think it's interesting that you said it, and like Shawn says something, but he says it differently, right? But women, I think by the nature of the way that we are raised, what we are conditioned is to not rock the boat. And it links back to this, this analogy of we are raised to be good girls, and to sort of, please. It's where the people pleasing comes. Being a good girl is about making people happy and keeping them pleased. And it's directly attached with this concept. And like I say, those words I have heard multiple times in my research, do not rock the boat. And women say to me all the time, I want to do this, but I can't rock the boat. Or I don't want to be seen to be rocking the boat, because it's conditioning. Yeah,
it is. And it's so like, don't rock the boat because you could be seen as dramatic. You could be seen as causing trouble. Whereas a man rocks the boat, he's mixing things up. He's like, he's taking charge. He's making change. He's innovative. Whereas a woman does it, it's like, oh, she's causing trouble.
I mean, Penny, you have a fantastic white paper on this. And we can definitely put in the link to it so people can have a read too. But I was shocked by a number, and it was 131 years is the prediction before we hit gender equality. Is that right? Am I getting that stat right? I thought we were further ahead.
Yeah, so that's a 2024 stat out of the World Economic Forum. When I started this research, the first thing, as you would know, Shawn, when you do any research, you go to the existing literature to sort of say, well, what does the current landscape look like in the context of what I'm looking at? And I was looking at women as experts and how many women are in positions as experts in places of power and influence, and equally understanding sort of at a macro level what was going on with gender equality. And the number, I mean, you always go to a decent source, and the best number I could find was the World Economic Forum's 131 years to reach gender parity at the current pace of change. And I think what is staggering about this number is a couple of things. The first one is the amount of talk, rhetoric. International Women's Day every year is like this huge thing that corporations invest in, that they celebrate. We have cupcakes, we have some innovative speaker come along to inspire people, and yet that number is that number. And we know for a fact that it has gone backwards since COVID, because so many women, like burnout was pervasive in COVID, with so many people working from home, trying to manage children that weren't in school, particularly here in Melbourne, where we were the most locked down city in the world. And this went on for 2 years. And there are a lot of women that basically came out the back of COVID and, opted out, particularly in the professional world, in positions of leadership, because they were just like, this is just not working for me anymore. And a lot of women also seeking more fulfillment in their lives off the back of that experience.
131 years just makes me so sad, because That my daughter won't even see that.
I think there's a lot of talk, and I mean, I wrote about this year at International Women's Day and just basically called it out and said that, you know, the problem is we spend so much time talking about the problem. One of the things I suggested this year and wrote an article for Women's Agenda around is like, where is the action? Like where, if you want to celebrate International Women's Day, where, if organizations are getting all of these people together, why are we not doing hackathons? Like, opportunities for people to come together and actually solve the problem that women are facing in this domain, from diverse perspectives, and actually come up with some innovative ways to start to solve those problems, even at a micro level within the current work environment that they're in, right? And then next year we come back and we hold ourselves to account. Like that's how change is made. And yet I speak across corporate. I mean, I do very well out of International Women's Day, but all I see is inspiration. There's just the action's just not there, not at the level of innovation that we need for that number to significantly change.
I think for like HR and D&I teams, sometimes it's just a tick box, you know, having worked in like marketing for big corporations is often it's like, well, what can we put on our Instagram about this? You know, what are we're going to put a post and we're going to put a rose on every woman's desk. That's not enough, you know. It's like it sometimes internally feels like a tick box.
Well, the other thing that's disturbing is, I mean, we saw it out of places like, Meta. There's a lot of big organizations now in the US that are actually disbanding their D&I teams because they're like, oh, well, it's just part of how we do business now. And I'm like, I don't buy that. And I think without direct focus and without teeth, you know, like serious accountability and having it, you know, on the dashboard and on the KPIs of the people at the highest level, nothing changes because what gets measured gets done, right? We know that over and over again. Yeah,
really interesting insight again from that paper for me that I didn't realize was like that barrier that women can have when they're experts in their field, like when they're the top notch at it, but then they still feel like you described as that icky feeling. They don't want to promote themselves as much as like a man would do, I suppose. So how does that affect like decision process? So you're an expert, but then you're held back or you feel held back because you don't want to promote yourself. That has to affect, you know, how you work in a boardroom and whatnot. But yeah, maybe tell you that good for our listeners to know from you, Penny, kind of that, because it was new to me, this icky feeling that they can get.
Yeah, so the research that I did was around understanding how a woman's relationship with the word expert impacted her ability to become one. And I kind of got curious about that because, again, I'd done over 300 interviews with high-performing women across entrepreneurship and executive. And what astounded me was that I would say probably, you know, a solid maybe 90% of them I would have called experts in their field. And not one of them called themselves an expert. And the visceral response when you would get the women to say the word expert was fascinating to me. Like you could see the ick. And like seriously. And so what came out of the research was that women have a very complex relationship with the word expert, and it makes them feel awkward, particularly calling themselves experts. And many of them said that it actually inferred peacocking or big noting yourself, which they didn't want to do. And equally, for some women, it stimulated a visual of a man's face, like actually when they thought of the word expert. I'm always really curious about how language, like the words we use, like what the meaning is that we attach to them. So that was kind of where the ick came from. So when you think about this in the context of decision making, what was fascinating to me was that none of these women would call themselves an expert. And when you asked them why, they said to me, well, I haven't ticked all of the boxes yet that would make me an expert. And I'm like, well, that's really interesting. So what then are the boxes that you need to tick in order to be an expert? And do you know what their answer was? I don't know. So how do you become the thing when you don't know how to become the thing? And the irony of this was, like I said, some of these women were doctors, as in, you know, academic, PhD qualified academics, you know, clearly experts in their field. And they said, I'm not there yet. And I'm so what would get you there? They couldn't tell me. And what was really interesting, and I can give you guys this link as well, was I was like, okay, well, let's think about a woman that you look up to as an expert. So the other thing that came out of the research was that what motivates women to actually change the world and have a positive impact is the word impact. They're not motivated to become leaders. Like, they don't wake up one day and go, I want to be a leader. They don't wake up one day and go, I want to be an expert. They wake up one day and say, this is really pissing me off, or this is really hurting someone that I love and care about, and I want to make a difference in the world. So I'm here to make an impact. And so I would get them to think about an impact expert, a woman that was changing the world that they admired. Easily they could do that immediately. And then I was like, okay, what makes her an expert? And they would just reel off the qualities and the behaviors of these women. So I captured all of them, and then I created the expert checklist. So I could actually then give women the checklist, so they no longer had to sit there and say they didn't know what would make them an expert. They can now download it from my website, and they can actually tick off to validate the fact that they are an expert already.
I have to ask you, what's on the list?
So it was things like she stands in her conviction. So she's someone who is willing to be courageous and challenge the status quo. She's evidence-backed. She plays a long game. So she's not about the quick win or the trend. She's about the long-term impact, and she's very consistent in her message. She's intentionally adaptable. She's passionate and engaging. She stands in her power. So that was the conviction. She lives what she teaches. So she doesn't just talk the talk. She clearly demonstrates or walks the walk. The bit I loved, which was fascinating, she makes mistakes and she shares them in the service of making it safe for others. Now, that was interesting, right? Because that was one of the qualities that was most admired. Along, the other things were important, but they were like, she's not afraid to make a mistake and learn from it and share that experience. And yet these women were saying that what stopped them from being an expert in some way, shape or form was that they basically weren't perfect yet. They hadn't done everything, or, they weren't ready yet. So this idea of, we admire women that have all of these experimental qualities. That's what makes them an expert. And yet I can't experiment myself, because if I fail, then I'm not an expert. So the standard we held ourselves to versus what we admired in others were completely incongruent.
That last one, I love that so much, because it's actually often those stories of failure are the ones where we learn so much. The people that are sharing the story, but the people that are actually receiving the story as well. And yeah, I never thought that would have been one of the qualities, but actually that's the one out of all of them that resonated the most with me.
I think of Brené Brown, Brené Brown came up a lot as one of those examples. And I mean, her whole work is on shame and vulnerability. And she has always been brilliant at sharing her own flaws, her own vulnerability, how she's constantly challenged in this space, even though she is the expert in the field.
Penny, I got to ask, because you mentioned one thing there, entrepreneurship, because I think if one place that this would be a particularly strong sore point, I feel, is entrepreneurship. So because especially if you're pitching to VCs, which is usually tend to be male dominated, and if you're pitching to West Coast, like I want to say arrogance, but like you need to just promote yourself to a degree that makes even the most arrogant person maybe feel a little uncomfortable. So in entrepreneurships and startups, like how does this affect women's decision to do that? And I'd highlight just my own personal story, because I launched my first company with my wife, and she's an absolute genius in tech transfer. She's what built my business plan from my PhD into our first company. But we realized very quickly in the investment front that like it would be me, I was the best to put my face forward, just because I had that kind of arrogance, confidence, it came a little easier to me. It was still hard, but easier to me than to her. So it's like a real life example where she lost opportunity maybe, or face time, just because we needed the money to make the company successful. And it was just more challenging for her to see herself as an expert. So just a lot there, but I'd love to get your comments on that, especially for women entrepreneurs to make that jump. And maybe it's a bit of imposter syndrome, but I think most entrepreneurs, you kind of have to have a bit of it to be successful.
So I'm going to talk about two pieces of research, one mine and one, I think it was out of I have to find, I think it was Harvard, but it was fascinating. And it was around entrepreneurs and women and men. Okay. So let's start with, not my research first. So one of the things that made me feel absolutely ill when I read it, when it comes to pitching to VCs, unfortunately, you pitching, even if your wife was really competent, probably would have secured you money well and truly over the likelihood of your wife getting it. And the reason for this is they ran analysis, and they found that the questions VCs ask women versus men who are pitching are completely different. So the questions VCs ask men are all about how are you going to scale? How are you going to grow this organization? And the questions that they predominantly ask women who pitch are all around how are you going to manage the risk and how are you going to manage it when it all goes to shit? And I'm using my own words, but that was basically the essence, and I can share the link. It blew me away. And so think about that in terms of the context already, right? The woman is going into a position that is completely unequal. And this is why I think VCs, depending on what country you're in, I think in Australia, it's less than 5% of VC money goes into female founders. And when I saw this research, I was like, this is interesting. So this is a complete and utter unconscious bias, but the line of questioning on average is completely different from men to women. And so you can imagine already, like if you're asking women all about things going bad and you're asking men all about how great things are going to be and how you're going to make this business wonderful, who are you going to give money to? So that's the first caveat I want to wrap around it. And I don't want to disincentivize women. Like this is reason why women need to pitch more. And this is why this knowledge, like I always say, awareness is the first step to change, right? I said that earlier. But now that you have this knowledge, use it to your power. So if you are a man pitching with a woman and you notice the line of questioning changing, you have an opportunity to reframe the narrative. And as a woman, the same thing. So if they're asking you all these questions about risk and how you're going to manage it when it goes to crap, I would actually be sitting there going, well, could we first speak about how I'm going to grow this company, how I'm actually going to make sure that it grows and it grows in a way that's safe so that we actually don't need to worry about that. Like you have an opportunity to reframe this narrative now that you're aware of it. So don't use it as a disincentive. In my research, what was fascinating, you spoke about imposter syndrome, was these women, these unbelievably high performing women, still said one of the biggest barriers to calling themselves an expert was that they were afraid of criticism and being exposed as an imposter. And that was, like I say, one of the biggest barriers. And I was like, if these women feel this way, then what hope is there for those of us who are trying to build our credibility and expertise? These women have already arrived, and yet they won't allow themselves to arrive, and like your wife, to pitch herself. And the only way we get better at these skills, the only way we become more confident or more resilient to the rejection that we have to get as an entrepreneur, because you cannot get yeses unless you get no's. And I can tell you the no's will far outweigh the yeses, is rejection therapy. It is putting yourself into spaces where you are likely to be rejected, because like psychology will tell us, the best way to cure any fear or phobia is exposure. The other thing that came out for these women was that the cost of this, like they were so afraid of being ridiculed and called out for not like for even saying one thing that was wrong or perhaps not 100% correct, that it actually stopped them from taking media opportunities, you know, from standing on stages. So again, places where their influence and power and their visibility would be taken to another level.
And this is all coming back to that decision not to act, you know, because of all of these fears, you know, that you're particularly seeing in women. And as a result of that, we're losing out on opportunities.
Justified fears, it seems like, right? Like,
yes,
they are
against it. Yeah.
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 Sorry, Michelle. They are absolutely justified. Yeah.
It's just all leading to, you know, you think you're making the safer decision by not acting, that it's safer. It's going to be safer for your mental health, for your ego, for your, you know, everything. I think for me, that's just, I didn't realize we were going to get this deep into the root cause in this conversation. And it's hitting me like a ton of bricks, and it's making me feel really sad and making me question all of those times in my career where I just stayed still, or I didn't take a risk, or didn't pursue creating my own thing or doing my own thing for fear of rejection or fear of saying no, or, you know, fear of looking stupid or somebody saying something negative. Yeah, I'm just kind of feeling a little bit sad now.
Well, yeah, and a question of follow-up for me would be like, how do we build businesses or teams? Like, I mean, with my wife, it's great because I could just be like, I know you know something, tell me, right? Like, don't be shy. But like, how do we in a work environment, and I mean, even with an entrepreneur, like, how do you build a place that you're getting like all you can out of each employee? Because honestly, if you hire, you know, a brilliant woman and she's scared to speak up, like, you're not getting your dollar value, right? So we want to make sure that we build a place that like we're utilizing all that brain capacity. So maybe like from ground zero, Penny, like we're just starting a business. How do we, or what should we try to do to make sure we're getting the most out of our employees? Well, and specifically the women.
So the first thing that I advocate all the time is sit down with a pen and paper. Only because we know our brain processes differently when we write. It's almost like you go deeper quicker. But sit down with a pen and paper and get curious about your relationship with the word expert. So as a woman, just sit down and go, well, what is the meaning I attach to this? You know, what does the word expert mean to me? What does it look and feel like if I use it as a label for myself? And if it feels ick, ask yourself, where does this story come from? Where did the story come from? Because that's all it is, right? We are meaning-making machines. We are the stories we tell ourselves. We have created a story. Where did the story come from? So that's the first thing I advocate. Get curious about your relationship with the word expert. The second thing that I found fascinating in the research was one of the best ways to get a woman to call herself an expert was for someone else to label her as such. So one woman said, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I do now because I wrote an article for Smart Company and they called me an expert. And so what we've now found is that like actually calling out and identifying like in meetings, oh, you know what? I'm actually going to defer to Jennifer on this because we see her as the expert in this domain. Like as simple as that, advocating for someone and calling them that makes a massive difference for a woman actually stepping into this space. The third thing that I find really interesting as well, and this comes from, I think it was when Obama was in administration, and they found, and this is a known phenomenon. So a woman will say a brilliant thing in a meeting, come up with an amazing idea. It will be completely overpassed. And 3 minutes later, 5 minutes later, a man sitting at the same table will say the exact same thing. And it will be his idea, and it will be completely erased that the woman said anything. And so in the Obama administration, they noticed this. And so they had this mandate as a team, which I thought was amazing, was that every time a woman put an idea on the table, they would second it and third it. So not to, what would you say, reinforce bad ideas, but to make sure that the idea was fully heard, right? And that it was acknowledged as the person who actually put the idea on the table. And it sounds crazy, but this is the reality of what we are dealing with. Women say all the time, I feel like I have to work twice as hard to get the same recognition and the same opportunities. And the research tells us that that is true. There is a thing called the authority gap. Have you guys heard of this? Oh. So the authority gap basically means, and this is a bias both men and women hold towards women. So you can have a woman and a man, right? And the man's qualified, say, for the job that he's doing. The woman can be as qualified or slightly more qualified. The man is still perceived by both women and men as the more authoritative figure in that position, more trusted. And again, that's just conditioning, right? Because so many over the years, like so many people in places of power and influence have always been male and masculine.
Does that change anything for you, Shawn?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just, it makes you want to like, it's a tough question, but how do you change things, right? And I mean, it's all about decisions. That's one of the big things we like about this podcast, but also like Michelle and I have this big dream is to like reinvigorate a generation's belief in decisions, right? So that your decisions matter. And ultimately that's the big goal of what we're trying to do together, I suppose. And it's It's about making decisions in the office. It's making decisions with your colleagues to start doing this, right? Because it sounds like we just need to do it. As simple as it is, right? Like at the beginning of your conversation, not in inspiration anymore. We just need action, right? And we need to make people accountable to those actions.
Without a doubt. And like when you say change it, it's like, we don't have to change everything at once. It's like if every one person does what, like if you tomorrow, Shawn, start calling out women as experts because they are in your eyes, that will make a difference. And then if Michelle turns around and spends the night journaling to understand her relationship with the word expert, and Dan, Michelle, from what I've read and seen about you, you are definitely an expert in your field. And so hopefully that would then encourage you to start calling yourself an expert in your field. Like, this is how change happens. If we all just do something micro, the compounding effect is what shifts things.
I'm definitely going to watch pitches like with you, Michelle. Like, if it ever goes down that path now, like I wasn't cognizant of that before. And Michelle's an absolute expert in marketing, right? And we're going to do pitches together. And so, I'm just one thing that I'm going to take away for sure is because that was a fascinating part for me. But sorry, Michelle, I interrupted you.
No, I'm excited about that as well now. Now we're going to be doing the next round of investment pitches. I'm going to be calling them out. I caught you. No, it's fascinating. I have to say, Shawn is very good. Whenever we're in meetings, you will always say, I'm going to defer to Michelle. She's an expert in that, when we kind of comes to marketing with the business. And so that's, I always kind of feel like I'm very much supported into that. But I think the other thing that now, like Shawn is an expert in neuroscience. I'm an expert in marketing. We are trying to kind of now become experts in decision making. So, Shawn is definitely an expert in the physiology of decision fatigue. But for me now, I'm learning as much as I can about not just the physiology, but also the psychology frameworks, decision making frameworks, with the goal to help people make better decisions. That is what our whole company, the podcast, everything that we're doing is about. Like, how can we help people make better decisions in a world where we're making 35,000 decisions a day and the quality of those decisions is deteriorating as the day goes on. And so I just found it really fascinating, is like stepping into that as an expert, but I can be learning publicly. Like you said earlier, failing publicly. I've learned this today and I'm sharing this with you. I learned that, but I tried it and it didn't work. I'm sharing it with you. And I think, being quite public about this journey to becoming an expert in this space, I think is quite interesting.
It's so interesting. So one of the I've spoken all around the world in front of thousands of people, right? And one of the things that I often do before I get in front, or when I get in front of an audience, is it's like, you know what, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to talk to you about this topic. But here's the thing. I am not the oracle. I do not know everything. So if you have something that conflicts or that you do not agree with, or you have evidence to support a different perspective, put it on the table, because we're all going to be better for it. And immediately, and I share that with women all the time, because if you're afraid of criticism, that immediately puts any heckler out. Right? Because you're saying, I'm completely open. I'm not here to profess I know everything, and no one should expect me to, because I can't possibly. And I'm completely open to building my knowledge and yours by getting more diverse perspectives in the room. That's what we're here for. I'm not here to talk at you. I'm here to engage with you. And it's a beautiful way, like I say, to diffuse and really calm that central nervous system, to say people can put their ideas on the table. It doesn't mean that I'm not good at what I'm doing.
Just doing it publicly and learning publicly and sharing, okay, yes, I am learning, but I'm on the road to share what I've learned, and hopefully one day I'll feel confident enough in calling myself an expert in decision making, as well as, other areas that I've worked hard to get there already.
Shawn, I'm curious. So I created a psychometric and a skills framework in my earlier stages of this journey around adapting with intention. So when we're talking about decisions, the reason I created this was because I was spending a lot of time in large corporations, and equally what I was seeing in the world around us with the pace of change with technology. And what I was seeing was that people were making decisions, but they were unconscious. So we were like, adaptability is an innately human skill. Right? And we adapt to our environment because it's what has kept us alive as a species. But so much of the decisions we don't make are associated with unconscious adaptation. So it is a decision because we are changing and evolving. And often that unconscious adaptation is what creates bad and often toxic behaviors. Like busy would be my best example. Like the busy epidemic in corporate is crazy, right? And busy, the word contains no useful information, and often I found it's code for something else. So what I created was intentional adaptability, which was basically how do you bring meaning and intention to the forefront of how you adapt, so that, to your point, Michelle, like, and what you guys talk about, so that you can make better quality decisions. So half the time it's just being conscious of the fact that sometimes your behavior is changing and you don't even realize it. That is not making a choice, but it is making a choice.
Yeah. No, I mean, you hit the nail on the head to what I think is one of the most fascinating topics in neuroscience at large right now, which is decision fatigue. Because it's something that just our generation is suffering from now, right? Like our parents didn't need to worry about it because decision fatigue happens from the quantity of decisions you make, but also the stress and anxiety you feel when you're making those decisions. And we're all getting more stressed out and we're all making more decisions. Michelle said 35,000 decisions a day now, right? What I like about, or what's interesting to me about decision fatigue is it's physiological. So there's psychological components, of course, with behavior change and how your mind deals with it. But actually the fundamental biology of your brain is changing with decision fatigue. And what we see with that is basically your brain says, you know what, I've made too many decisions today and the network is overloaded. It's just like when you run for a long period of time and your muscles in your legs just physically can't run anymore. Your brain kind of hits a similar wall with the number of conscious decisions that you're making using all of your executive functions that you're really thinking through. It says it can't do anymore. So then it defaults to previously known networks or decisions that it's safest or most comfortable with. So that's the biology that's changing. And strap the psychology on top of that. You have massive changes to behavior. And the thing about it, what you said, Penny, is it's unconscious. Right? It's your brain deciding kind of for you, or it's putting you down a path that your options were this. Now they're very, very small, right? And the choices you have are much fewer than you had before. So it affects all of us from this podcast, from our own research over the past, 5 years. We've seen this in pretty much every vocation, from, stay-at-home moms to the most high-performing elite athlete in the world. It's something that dramatically changes our happiness, our success. Because if you're not making the best decisions for yourself, you're not going to do as well at work and you're not going to do as well in your personal life.
And Michelle, I'm interested because we were talking about this the other day in your perspectives, because, is this something that is more pervasive in women than in men? And the reason I say that is because of the mental load that women carry with all of the duties. We were saying, like when I say all the duties, because we know women carry the load at home, all of the data shows us, it's still something like 70 to 80%, depending on what you look at. So is it more pervasive in women in terms of the fatigue?
Yes, we don't have that data yet, but I would say absolutely yes. With my husband now, I've shifted the conversation from the mental load of the house, because he's not able to qualify and understand that. He doesn't understand that when we go to a kid's birthday party, I'm thinking about what the kids are going to eat before they go, how much sugar they're going to eat when they're there, what's the gift, what they're wearing, do we need to take some change of clothes, what are they going to do afterwards, how are we going to get them to kind of regulate and come down after the high of a birthday party, what are we going to do with the sibling when the other one's at the party. For him, I say, oh, my son's going to a birthday party. He thinks he's just going to take the son to a birthday party, And so the mental load, he just doesn't understand. Now I've started talking about the decision load, and it's the decision load of the house. Now I make 90 to 95% of the decisions for the house. Right now, my bedroom is filled with piles of clothes because we're going on holiday tonight and I'm packing for 4 people. And, we're going skiing, trying to think about every possible scenario, how many layers everybody needs, how many days that we're there, making those decisions for 4 people. That is a huge decision load. But I make 95% of the decisions for the house. And that's the mental load that women talk about. And until now, we've not really been able to articulate it because men just don't understand. But when you say my child's going to a birthday party, and that birthday party is made up of 50 decisions that need to be made around the birthday party, all of a sudden my husband started to think about things a little bit differently and understands a little bit more about what I mean. And now when we divvy up tasks in the house, it's like, okay, you're going to take our son to this birthday party. You are going to be responsible for every decision that happens in that birthday party. He's like, well, what you mean? I've got to go and get a present. And then now he's starting to think about things. And yeah, you know, but you were saying the mental load, you know, the decision load, decision fatigue. I would put my money, all my money, my life savings on the fact that women do suffer from this more, because we're often carrying the decision load of the house, as well as maybe a full-time job and everything else that we've got going on, plus the way that we're wired. We think differently. Shawn, you might be able to add on to that.
No, you're right. Like, we know with decision fatigue, the more emotionally engaging the decisions you're making are, the faster it happens, right? And there's no more emotionally engaging decision for anybody than a mom and her kid, right?
Yeah.
So no, it makes perfect sense. It's just the pace of life now too. Like, moms have to make so many more decisions than they did years and years and years ago, right? Like, I used to just go outside and play in the yard for 4 hours, but now there's just a million other things that the moms need to think about and worry about, right? Like online, friends, social. There's just a whole lot more to do. And to add on to Michelle's point, like, for myself, I realized that some of the best things I can do is to take decisions away, like off my wife's shoulders. I used to be like, and I tell the story a few times, but like, oh, honey, you pick where we go for dinner. I'm such a nice guy, right? Or you plan the date, because then you get to pick what you want. But that was the worst thing I could do, because at the end of the day, like, what she wants is just less decisions, right? And any decision I can take off of her gives her more energy. So
I just want to pick up on a couple of things here, because I find this absolutely fascinating. So I can resonate with everything that you were saying, Michelle, about the decisions that need to be made. I love the reframe in terms of, you know, empowering women to talk about, let's talk about the decisions associated with that and who's going to make them, rather than it just be about the kids got to go to the birthday. Like, I think that's a really practical way to start to change who the distribution of decisions. I'm definitely going to play with that. But I equally think what is interesting is, even so, if you wrote down all the decisions for the birthday party, I would guarantee you that if you delegated that party to a man, he would probably say half of those decisions don't need to be made. They're irrelevant. And it's not to diminish. It's not to diminish, because again, we are different, right? We are completely different in terms of men and women, in terms of how we think. We know this. But we will look at every possible scenario, whereas I think men default to what is the minimum of decisions that I could make. So they would immediately, by taking that responsibility away, and I think as women, and I see this all the time, and I know it in myself, there's two things we need to do also to support this situation. One is, if we delegate the decision, we can't complain about it. Right? Because I think, again, even when men try to step into this space, often they'll now resist it, because we'll give them the decision and then complain about the decision that they make. And I always think of my grandmother, who has passed, and I remember when she said to me, your grandfather washed the dishes once. She goes, and he broke a plate, and so he was never allowed to wash the dishes again. And like, it's a simple analogy, but and he was like, I was like, what a brilliant strategy to not have to do the task anymore. So I think, you know, I love the practicality of talking about decisions, but I think also as women, we've got to let go a bit as well, and allow men to step into this space in the way that they would, and accept the fact they won't do it the way we do it.
It's so hard, and I'll be really honest, it's like I will delegate these things to him, and I'm watching like a hawk, because I know something's going to be forgotten. And poor guy can't win. Sometimes I just have to bite the tongue. And an example of this is like the kids at school, right? We get so many communications from the kids at school. It's ridiculous. And there's a WhatsApp group for my daughter's class and a WhatsApp group for my son's class. And at the beginning of the year, we decided to split. So I take my daughter's WhatsApp group and he would be on my son's. But I got added to my son's. And so I'm like watching this WhatsApp group go off, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's known close day tomorrow, or I'm pretty sure there's a birthday party and he hasn't mentioned anything to me, and I know he's not seen it. And I'm like waiting there, patiently waiting, like, have you missed something? Is there something that has I forgot anything on today? Is there something? Because I know that he hasn't done it. And so you're right, Penny. It's very hard.
I totally understand. I'm the same person. I just know it in myself. And to Shawn's point, like about the dinner, like my partner tried to organize dinner, I think once or twice. We've been together 10 years now, and he took me to these restaurants. I'm like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. Like you're not picking restaurants anymore. You took me, a special night was this, the food was good, this Asian place, but it was a place where you actually wrote down your own order on a piece of paper. He goes, the food's fantastic. I go, yes, but this is not romantic. So I've like immediately, I've given the decision, and then I've retracted the decision and said, you're not making any decisions about dinner anymore. And then Shawn said before, we're like, I don't want to make any decisions. I say to him all the time, he goes, well, you just decide, because he's trying to appease me and do the right thing. It's not that he's trying to resist the decision, but he also knows that if he makes the decision, he's going to be crucified for the decision. So it's almost like an untenable position.
Poor guys, you can't win.
No, I love it.
I actually just want to come back a little bit to what you were saying before about the intentional adaptability. And I think there's this idea of like autopilot decisions and just being on kind of like autopilot defaults. And I think we do this. We make autopilot decisions often when we're suffering from decision fatigue, when we've had cognitive overload and we just can't take anymore, and the brain is just defaulting, and you almost go into this kind of autopilot decision mode. In your experience, Penny, is there any way that we can disrupt that? We can get out of that state so that we're making more intentional decisions?
The best way to disrupt yourself is to breathe. So I think the reason we are making unconscious decisions is because we are not present. And this is part, as I speak about, I run a program I've been running it for 7 years in corporations called Busy Equals Bullshit. And, basically this whole busy that we have created makes us not present. And like I said, it's the unconscious adaptation. It's like, how fast can I run? How do I keep up? And it's this, just keep doing. And so every space is full. And when every space is full and you are constantly telling yourself you're busy, the reality is you're probably rarely where your feet are. Your brain is not where your feet are. And so just allowing yourself to remember to breathe throughout the day, it sounds so simple. It is proven to be the most effective way to bring your body back into the present moment, and equally to recalibrate your central nervous system into homeostasis, which is that space where you feel grounded and present. And I'm sure Shawn would know this, where your brain does its best work, because you're open. You're not in that heightened state of fight, flight, or freeze. You're not in survival mode. Your brain is open. You're able to think more clearly. And so I would just say, I'm trying to be simple, but the first thing is to breathe. The second thing that I think is really interesting is get curious about what busy means to you. And again, I'm starting with simple stuff, but most people will have used busy in the last day, if not the last week. And like I said, more often than not, busy is code for something else. And when I unpack this, I did it with 45 executives last week in one of the biggest banks in Australia. And I've got all the sticky notes on a table behind me. It is so sad. These are senior executives. I feel overwhelmed. One of them said, when someone asked them how they felt and they said busy, and I say, what were you really saying? It's like, piss off. Go away. I cannot possibly take on anymore. I don't. And you talk about decision fatigue. I can't make any more decisions. I just want to go and hide in a room because I'm so exhausted. Like, this is what people say when we basically step behind and say, what is the narrative in your head? What are you really saying? So getting people to get curious about what they're really saying when they're busy, and removing the word busy from their vocabulary so that they can start to connect in. Because I think the other thing is we live in our heads now, which is an extremely dangerous place to spend 100% of your time. We are completely disconnected from our body, and the feelings and emotions we have live in our body. And when we don't process those feelings and emotions and acknowledge them, it's very hard to intentionally adapt. And the more you suppress them and the more you squash them down, the more likely they are to present, and they'll do it in a weird and wonderful way when you don't want it to happen, and your behavior will not be in alignment with who you want to be. Not to mention, you will manifest some really beautiful health issues the more you suppress feelings that do not feel good.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's the science supports exactly what you said from the context of decision fatigue, which I said it's like this is a very new science, I would say, like the physiology of it, but the clinical work done to date, that taking a breath, actually you see a restoration in decision quality. Which is a big thing. And I mean, just from our own podcast, we know we've had some extremely high, performing individuals on the show, from traders and newscasters and things like this. And one kind of thread, I think you'd agree, Michelle, that we see across it is they've naturally built up this habit of taking a breath, of going for a walk, of just getting away from the situation. So no, Penny, I think like it's from a physiology perspective, what you've been, telling his executives for a long time, like now we're learning maybe the mechanism underneath it, because it's absolutely true. This is what your brain needs to kind of recover from the overload of information.
And it's so interesting as well, Shawn, like, and Michelle, I think when like all of the stuff, I always talk about simple stuff, right? It's the simple stuff and the small stuff, and it's often the stuff that we know that works. The problem is we won't create the space to practice and build the muscles because we're so wired now for the dopamine hit, which is all short-term focused. And I think that's perhaps the most dangerous decision we make. It's the dangerous decisions to continue to feed the dopamine hit. Like if you find you're doing that all the time, which most of us are, that is definitely going to impact the quality of your decisions, right? Because everything, like you're constantly hyper-stimulating your brain. And when the brain doesn't rest, I mean, you're the neuroscientist, what happens to a brain that never switches off?
Well, we're still learning. I mean, if you think about it, our 98% of human history was on, say, the African savannah. So our brain was evolved for that. And how many decisions were we making there, right? So we're completely fish out of water for the society we currently live in, right? And yeah, the repercussions of all this, we don't know yet, because society is so different from 10 years ago. It's just everything is different. So
There's one interesting thing, I think Shawn can talk more to this, is like a way of building resilience as well. And there's kind of some neuro-backed mindfulness techniques. Shawn, could you just talk us through them and just give us a couple of those examples? I think we had an example of someone in business, maybe someone who was trying to quit alcohol and something else, I can't remember. But just tell us a little bit more about those mindfulness techniques, because I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, it's one of our bigger projects. We got approached, well, where it started from, I'd say, for like top athletes in the world and in big sport is obviously at that level, physical abilities are quite close, and it all comes down to your brain, right? And one of the big things that these athletes struggle with is decision fatigue. And so they were looking for new ways to build resilience towards it. How do we make our brain make high quality decisions for longer periods of time, essentially? And so we explored kind of two physiological mechanisms. One was very interesting to me, actually, was mindfulness. And I'll be the first to admit that I was very wrong. I thought it was just a spiritual practice. I didn't know there was such strong physiological underpinnings to certain aspects of mindfulness. What's interesting about mindfulness, though, is it helps with decision fatigue and building that resilience, because it detaches you from a lot of the emotions. If you do it properly and you're able to kind of see an emotion and understand and recognize that it's temporary, so if you're angry or whatnot, then not have it affect your decisions as much, then you suffer from decision fatigue at a slower rate. So if you can detach from the emotions of decision making. And the other one, which is still being explored, we have a interesting podcast on that as well, is cognitive motor dual tasking. So it's when you pair heavy cognitive loads with physical exercise. And we don't know really how it's working yet, but it seems to kind of help to build the infrastructure of the brain to make it more resilient to higher information loads, which if it can handle more information, it means the cost of each decision may be a little less from a cognitive perspective. So that's the other thing that we're exploring. So two physiological mechanisms of building that resilience.
With the second one, can you give us an example of the dual? Like, what would be an example of doing that?
First thing to highlight is not brain games. So we know, generally speaking, brain games don't do anything beyond getting better at the game itself. So like your Sudoku and stuff like that. It's unfortunate. It doesn't mean don't do it, obviously. obviously, if you have fun. But no, it's pairing things like, and you don't need fancy equipment for it either. That's why I like it. There is fancy equipment available, but it'd be like going on a treadmill and then, start off with a random number, 4,286, and then count backwards from 7 or something like that. Like, just really try to strain your brain. And if it's math, then the next day do, random numbers and think of an animal that corresponds to the letter of the alphabet and things like that. So just anything you can do that's very complex while you're doing a physical exercise. So that's the key component to this, is you have to be doing physical exercise at the same time. I also like it too because we do even aging projects, and it hits any age and fitness level. So you can be very unfit and maybe older, and you still get a benefit all the way up to the best athletes in the world. So no, it's a really interesting thing. I mean, the other thing is like products, like it's becoming such an important concept, I feel, and you see the science to support this. This is maybe like decision fatigue at large, maybe the most important cognitive disabler of our time. And I mean, we've been working on it for years for a product. Over the next number of years, we will probably see some products come to market that are tackling specifically this. Not mental fatigue, not an energy drink, but something designed to hold and build that or give you quality decisions for longer periods of time by resisting decision fatigue.
Penny, I'm just conscious about time. We cannot thank you enough for today. I could keep this conversation going, and I think the work that you're doing is extraordinary and so relevant, and I'm so interested in, honestly, I'll be super honest, how it can help me personally.
I'm dying to see your product.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. I know. We were saying last week, we're going to be sending all of our guests some. So as soon as it's ready, we'll send you some over and be able to learn a little bit more about it when everything's launched. But yeah, it's very exciting. Would just love to finish on maybe top 3 takeaways from you, and for you to also just tell us a little bit about how our audience can reach you as well.
So practical things to take away. If you are someone who uses the word busy all the time, challenge yourself to remove it from your vocabulary for 1 week and notice what happens inside your brain and what happens in the way that you connect with people when your default response is not busy. Because it's not a conversation opener, it's a conversation closer. And the less humanly connected we are, the less happy we are. That is proven. And I think the less happy we are, I can't speak to this, but my argument or my belief would be the less likely we are to make quality decisions, because we're probably not feeling great in and of itself from a mental health perspective. So I would say remove the word busy from your vocabulary, create the space to breathe. Would be the second thing. And the third thing I would say is call out a woman who's an expert. Any woman, do it on social media, do it in a room full of people. Acknowledge a woman who's an expert, because you have no idea the difference that it will make to her owning her expertise. If people want to find me, I'm pretty prolific on the old LinkedIn, so please feel free to connect with me there under my name, or they can have a look on my website, hackinghappy.co.
Amazing. We'll link to all of those below as well. Really, thank you so much for your time today. We've loved talking to you. For all of our listeners, please like, share, comment, Penny, and we'll get back to you. If you've got any questions in the comments, please drop them in. And as always, make every decision count. And we'll be back next week with another episode. Thanks. Bye.